Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Doctor2Doctor in the Chatroom. I'm so happy to have you guys back here with me another Saturday to share this hour. I always look forward to this time with you. I hope that you guys are taking really good care of yourselves. You know, the COVID-19 hospitalizations are going up again for the last maybe 5 or 6 weeks in a row. So I've been reading articles where businesses are considering reinstating the mask mandates, policies headed into the fall and the winter. So we want you to be careful. The CDC is monitoring 3 new variants of the virus, and some public health experts are advising those with chronic pre existing conditions that could weaken the immune system, such as HIV, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, as well as senior citizens, to just monitor those case counts in your local areas and take extra precautions, including wearing your mask. If you're a caregiver for somebody who has those increased risk of complications like infections, make sure that you are putting on a mask when you go out in public so that you don't bring the virus back to them. As far as the types of masks, experts agree that the N95 and the P100 respirator masks are the most effective against the virus. The Environmental Protection Agency, rather, specifically states that cloth masks are not effective. They are ineffective. So keep that in mind as well. And just a side note that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has said that based on the current available data, the newest COVID-19 vaccines will protect against the most serious symptoms of infection from the current circulating variants of the virus. So please be careful and use those necessary precautions to protect yourself and those around you. Okay. Okay. So a few weeks ago, I had a guest on the show to talk about narcissistic abuse. It was through that guest and that show that I was able to connect with another person that has experienced narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. And she is here today to talk about her experience as well as her book. Although narcissistic abuse is not a formally recognized diagnosis, it is often used to describe a syndrome where being in a relationship to a narcissistic partner can adversely affect one's emotional health as well as other parts of your health. To begin the healing process, first, you have to identify the instances of abuse. And then even that can be harder. It sounds easier said than done because abuse from a narcissist is extremely manipulative and controlling. And because of their low frustration tolerance, they can explode and become very emotionally and verbally abusive. They frequently gaslight and put others down. One of the most damaging aspects of narcissistic relationships is that the narcissistic partner can quickly vacillate between supportive and kind to cruel and manipulative. Additionally, narcissists need to be in control. They know how to pull you back in after they've pushed you out so far. So remember that. And their goal is to preserve their ego, which can be quite fragile at times. And these preservation attempts by them can be both conscious and subconscious. So we want you to keep these things in mind. And if you are dealing with something like this, you probably need to talk to somebody. Our guest today, Miss Victoria Marshall, is passionate about helping others live a life beyond their brokenness. With a background in social work, Christian coaching, and leadership, she helps people understand how their lives from birth to adulthood are filled with experiences that shape who we are and how these experiences can impact our ability to live life to the fullest. She is dedicated to seeing people turn their pain into purpose. Victoria earned a Bachelor's of Science and a Bachelor's of Social Work in 2012 from the Oral Roberts University. In 2017, she graduated from Regent University with a Master's of Arts in Organizational Leadership. She currently lives in Chicago with her daughter, Selah, and enjoys painting, writing poetry, and gardening. Her newest book, Broken on Purpose, she'll talk about today. The relationship edition was released in June of 2023. We are so very excited to have her here in the chat room with us today. And you are going to hear from her right now. Thank you so much for being here with me, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've had this topic on several occasions, but usually I think only once I've had this topic where I actually had somebody on that experienced narcissistic
Hmm.
uh, abuse. Um, and usually when we're talking about it, we're talking about it from more of a clinical perspective. So thank
Hmm.
you for being here to share your real life experiences. I think I want to start with just kind of how you landed here. I know Broken on Purpose is a book that you've written. Uh,
Yeah.
let's just talk about that and how you landed here.
Yeah, I started writing this book in 2019, not really knowing what was going to come out of it.
Hmm.
I was just like, I need to start writing about my life, but really with the focus on helping people. And then I ended up, I was married at the time, having my daughter, stopped, and in the middle of having my daughter, um, found out basically that I was married to someone who was bipolar, mania, with psychosis,
Hmm.
a lot of the toxic kind of symptoms that we hear about with narcissists.
Yeah.
But on top of that, having a clinical diagnosis. And so being a new mom and having to deal with that and being married really shifted or gave me perspective on what to write on with this book. Um, and at the time, I had postpartum depression, and I was wondering, like, what was this going to be used for? How was I going to use it? And I really felt like God was like, because you're broken on purpose. That's what this is for. And so,
Wow.
really, yeah, it's a life principle that I'm just trying to get out into the earth for people to embrace their brokenness. Because a lot of times, I mean, I did feel embarrassed for what I was going through, right? I had this really big wedding. All the pictures looked good on social media. I had just had a daughter, so I had this like happy marriage that was portrayed in all the right ways. And so it was very embarrassing to go through what I went through. And I felt shame and guilt also divorcing somebody and bringing a child into this world and not being able to raise her in a two-parent home. And so, really broken on purpose allowed me to embrace what I was going through without having to have that shame and that guilt.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that part, the shame part, because I
Mhm.
have I have talked to people that, you know, including myself, that have seen signs before the wedding,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, but you feel compelled to go through.
Yeah, yeah,
Most people don't have the courage not to go through with it, right? Because you've
yeah,
invited
yeah.
all these people, you've done all this work, and not to mention, like you want it.
Mhm, mhm.
You want it,
Yeah,
right? Um,
absolutely.
why do you think you embraced the even the shame and and said, "Hey, this is a part of the healing." Like you just said, "Hey, I got to
Mhm, mhm.
get there." Is that what
Yeah,
that was like?
yeah, because I think shame silences us, right? And it puts us into isolation and it makes you think that nobody else can relate to what you're going through. And all while I was going through it, I would have people sitting me down and they would say, maybe you need to just separate for a little bit. Maybe you need to walk away. But this was my marriage, and this was my life. And so, like you just
Yeah.
said, we feel really compelled to help people. And because I am that empathetic person who's always wanting to rescue people, and I can see the best in them when they don't necessarily see it in themselves.
Oh,
um, it's really what kept me there. And so, because I love so deeply, and I had been committed to these vows I had made for better or for worse, for
Yeah.
sickness and in health, that was really in the back of my mind. But when it got to a point where I had to look at my daughter, it was like, okay, are you going to stay in this environment? And what are you teaching her by staying in this environment? Or can you be strong enough to walk away? And I didn't even realize my own strength at the time, because I was dealing with so much shame and so much guilt. And just when reality smacks us in the face, and when you like when your eyes start to open, right when the blinded eyes begin to open from everything we're blinded by with love, it can really come down on you hard. Um, and so, yeah, I think understanding that my shame was like kind of keeping me silent and isolated, really is what kind of impacted me to really start to embrace my brokenness.
Did you also feel, and I'm really speaking from like self experience, like did you also feel like I felt angry that something controlled me?
Oh, yes. I always say divorce is like a deathless death,
Mm,
because you're losing this person who you have loved, you've centered your whole life around them. And like a lot of us, sometimes we find our identity in our marriages and we find identity in our
yeah.
relationships.
Hmm.
That when you're losing that, it's like, who am I? What do I even like anymore? And so I definitely went through the stages of grief, um, anger, depression, sometimes back to anger, shame, and then also back to like kind of um, the bargaining. Like, okay, well, maybe if I wouldn't have complained, this would have worked out. Or maybe if I would have just separated for longer, this would have worked out. But I went through all those stages of grief, anger especially, um, when I was going through that divorce, almost like I was experiencing a death.
The stages of grief.
Yeah.
That's what it is, and that's why you were able to kind of go between those. So how has
Mhm.
life led you to this moment?
Um, I would say that I was broken way before my marriage, right? And I think
Wow.
sometimes broken people are attracted to other broken people. Um, because when we know better, we do better, right?
Yes.
Um, but because I didn't know how broken I was, I found attraction in this other broken person. And so it was like, oh, you
It's
accept
called
my
trauma
wounds?
bonding. We bond
Yes,
over our trauma.
yes.
Yes.
It was
Uh-huh.
absolutely trauma bonding. And so it was like, well, if you'll accept my wounds and that they're not healed, then I'll accept yours. And so it's almost like two people like trying to trump each other. It's like, well, you did
Yeah.
this, but you did this, but you did this, and then that shame again tells you that you'll never find better. It's like, well, who will accept me with this brokenness? Who will accept me after everything I've done? So yeah, I was a lot broken before my marriage, and even realizing the patterns that had been in my previous relationships of always settling. And that's something that I talk about in my book, that when you know better, you do better, and then you go from settling for just better to settling for the best. Um, and I think because every person I was with was probably a little bit better, you don't see as bad as it is. But now that I'm healed and I'm able to really recognize things for as they are, I can say that I'm striving to be with the best, not just a better person.
Wow. So you really answered a question that I've been asking a lot. Like, no, seriously, like why do I seem to attract these
Mhm.
types of
Mhm.
people, right?
Yeah.
And you start to question yourself when it's really and truly the commonalities, the traumatic commonalities, to be more specific, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a trauma bond, like you said.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you find the strength to see the good in the things that have broken you?
Well, I think we can either dwell on what's happened and stay in that place and stay in our pain, or sometimes we don't even stay in our pain, because staying in our pain sometimes will lead us to healing. Sometimes we avoid it, right?
Hmm.
But if we can come to a place that says, I don't want to be like this anymore, I think that's the first step. And so just being able to recognize that I no longer want to be broken, but I do want to heal. And what would that look like? Because I can stay in this broken area of my life. But really, if I choose to be better, what's what's the worst that can happen? Like if I
Mm-hmm.
have to be present and I have to be alive on this earth, I might as well be the best version of myself. So I really find the strength of like, obviously I've been trying to do everything on my own and in my own strength and in my own way, and look where it's got me. So let me take the time to dismantle everything that I know about myself and become this new person to heal. And let's try this new version of myself out.
Mm-hmm.
um, so really just finding the strength in breaking old patterns, and really having to dismantle even what may attract me to certain people. Is it codependency? Is it something that happened in my childhood? So having to dig deep, and so that's why I say like sitting with that pain and really unbreaking, and really digging deep into your patterns that you've had even maybe since a child and certain relationships, and really recognizing, where you can break that pattern to become a better person.
Mm-hmm. Um, can you kind of show us? Can you kind of walk us through like what it looks like to kind of do the dismantling? You know, can you give us some examples of what it looks like to really sit in the pain if you have to embrace it? Can you go there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is literally sitting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, in my book, one of the first kind of like acknowledgement is that sometimes deep healing like this requires solitude. And so it's coming to a place of saying, okay, I'm about to invest in myself. And so what does that look like? It means taking time to be home, journaling, thinking about your life, saying, I'm not going out this weekend. I'm not going to any longer allow things to distract me. Because I think a lot of times we can be avoidant and we'll just stay at work longer. We'll go shopping. We'll binge watch TV. We'll work on a project, all to
Mm-hmm.
avoid it. And although those are not necessarily bad things, right? When the time comes for us to maybe get in a new relationship, all that stuff is still there. And so then we
Mm-hmm.
get triggered and we recognize that we haven't actually dealt with it. We've kind of just shoved it under a rug and it's all still there when someone pulls the rug up.
Yeah.
So the first step I would say is to sit with it, to take that time to heal in solitude. You can't listen to everybody's advice. Everyone's advice is not sound advice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Finding a counselor that you really resonate with and not feeling obligated to stay with a counselor if they're not working for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to church, finding groups that you can join. Like I joined like a divorce support group, um, that really was helpful to know again that I wasn't alone, right? And to know that people were also angry and people also were happy and sad at the same time. Happy for a new life, but sad that you're losing a life. Um, and really learning what it means to like go through the patterns of your life. So think about all your relationships. For instance, if you feel like you are dating a narcissist, what type of people are you attracting? What's in you that's attracted to them?
Mm-hmm.
uh, Realizing, where did this start? Was it the absence of a parent? Was it because, some form of abuse as a child? Was it because of neglect? So
Mm-hmm.
breaking things like that. And sometimes it's definitely better to do that with clinical or psychological help, because it
Mm-hmm.
can bring on a lot of emotions. But if you're strong enough to kind of do it on your own, if you have the right tools, it can be an ongoing thing that you can work through on your own.
Yeah.
So sitting with that pain is the first step.
Mm-hmm. We are talking to Victoria Marshall, Broken on Purpose. We are at break. We will be right back on Doctor to Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM in just a moment. And we are back on 94.7 FM. I'm here with Victoria Marshall. She's talking about her book, Broken on Purpose, sharing her experiences dealing with narcissistic abuse. Let's get into some of the specifics of what it was like to be in this type of relationship, how you recognize certain things, or maybe how certain things got by you. Let's just kind of walk us through the actual experience. I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about my own life and maybe how I handled things. in relationships just based on maybe some things from my childhood, right?
Yeah.
And how certain things have held me captive
Mm-hmm.
just because um, I grew up a certain way, you
Right.
know. And it's so freeing when you come to terms with what your role may be
Mm-hmm.
in some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I took the time to really look into my childhood, I think I always say abandonment and rejection tried to take root in my life since I was a child. I was given up for adoption
Mm-hmm.
straight from birth. So from there, there's something that there's psychologists call the primal wound that developed, and it's literally where a baby may not remember their trauma, but their body remembers, and they know that they are being separated from the womb that they've been in, and that they don't hear that voice that they've been hearing for 9 months. And so
Mm-hmm.
upon being separated from my mother, I had trouble bonding with a family who I was with, and then that continued on. And then thankfully, I was adopted at 2 months old into a family, but again, still struggle with that bonding, a lot of crying. And so it's really interesting to even look into that and to recognize how infants can remember their trauma or recognize it, although they don't have the visual memories of it. And so I think that stayed with me a lot throughout my life. And then when I was younger and I actually found out I was adopted, really made me really kind of wonder, who am I?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out life, and why did my mother want me? And having to work through the lies of your family didn't want you, they gave you up. But also not understanding or being mature enough to know that giving someone up for adoption is actually an act of love, because you're saying, I can't do this, but someone else can. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean that your parents don't love you. And adoption really gives us a chance to be chosen by
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah.
And so, really, again, taking my brokenness for good and embracing that I got the opportunity to be chosen and placed into a family that was two parents, and they were a godly family. And so, I don't know what my life would have been like if my parents
Mm-hmm.
decided to just work it out and kind of tough it out as teenage parents. There's no
Mm-hmm.
telling
Mm-hmm.
what would have happened. But again, there's still something in you that needs to heal from that, even as a child. And so, growing up and being a teenager, you start to like boys, and you still want that acceptance, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even looking back into early relationships and just how I was so codependent, even as a child, and wanting just to have affirmation from people, and how that just carried on into my adult years and in college. And so, really, that brokenness and that abandonment that was placed in me from such a long time stayed with me for years, um, until I was really able to identify what it was.
Mm-hmm. So, what about this particular relationship that you write about um, in your book? Walk us through that.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much very similar to everyone who's been in a relationship like this. It starts off really great, right? It's the honeymoon stage, it's the
Yeah.
love bomb, it's the gifts, the trips. Nobody has a bad story. You don't really see people for who they are. Everything is, oh, I want whatever you want. I'll eat whatever you want to eat. Um, Kind of the mirroring, the person you're with really doesn't have their own identity. So they're just doing whatever you like to do. And you're thinking you're so compatible, but really people who may have like narcissistic traits, or have like these disorders, really don't have a sense of identity. And so they can
Mm.
cling so much to people like us because they just mirror us, and for the time we're giving them that sense of identity. um, and we just think that we have so much in common, and we relate so much that we don't recognize really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
um, but then when the true colors started to show, uh, that's when like the abuse started to come in. It starts off slow, right? Like somebody might say something and you're like, I don't think that's appropriate, but you put up with it because you love someone, or you put up
Mm-hmm.
with it because the way that they make up to you is with flowers and a gift, and it's the sorries, it's the promises, it's the I'll never do it again. For me, it was the counseling. Like that was a big thing. It was like, oh, we're getting help. We're going to counseling. But then not really
So
realizing
it
that,
wasn't your idea, that was his idea.
yeah, 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 yeah. But when I took a step back, I realized that like when we were in counseling, there were a lot of fingers pointed at me. Like I was always made out to kind of be the offender or someone who was like nagging or controlling. So even the person I was married to kind of made me think that I even had like these really bad anger issues, when really anger is the root of hurt and pain. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you hurt me and I can only take so much. So then I get angry, but then you gaslight me and you turn it on me. Um, and I think once our eyes are open back to the anger piece, we can really get angry at just like how much we put up with. And you don't even recognize someone's tactics and how manipulative they can be. Um, and so, yeah, in that relationship, it was hard for me to see at first, but then as things started to unfold, you have a hard time really believing that you're married to someone like this, that this person has these characteristics where they would hurt you or abuse you or talk to you in a negative way. Um, and so, again, being in denial, right? Denial is a stage of grief. So
Sure.
I was in my own stage of denial and not really believing that this person was as bad. And even kind of making excuses like, oh, maybe it's a stressful week at work. Maybe I am being controlling. Maybe I shouldn't bring this issue up. Maybe I am overdoing it by asking someone to come home at a certain time. And so you even start to lower your standards and you start to lose your identity in a relationship like this. And so that's sometimes like when these type of relationships end in divorce, you feel like you don't know who you are because this person has manipulated you so bad. They've made you feel like your standards hold no value. You're crazy for having these standards. Your standards are over the top. So you really have to relearn who you are. And so I went through a
Wow.
lot of that.
Um, so that's a good segue into
Mhm.
after the relationship, and you are unlearning and relearning. Um, how do you move forward in a healthy way? Like I just feel like sometimes who was that wrote the book? Steve Harvey, the 90-day rule or something about you know, being sexually involved. You don't do it before 90 days or something like that. I feel like there's just no standard or set rule in these particular cases, you know. So how do you move forward? What
Yeah,
kinds of things do you do or look for or
mhm.
have to do?
Yeah, just like you just said, I actually quote something very similar like that in my book. I say healing takes a lot of undoing and a lot of unlearning, and healing also takes a lot of learning and a lot of doing. So you have
Mm,
to undo and do. You have to learn and unlearn. Um, because I think for me, I walked out of that marriage and I learned that the new version of myself was this controlling, angry, defeated, emotional person. And so I had to undo all of that and
mm-hmm,
really look within and if sit and say, who am I authentically, like to my core? Who am I? And even having to look at who I was before I married this person, who
mm-hmm,
I was as a child. And it's like, that's who I am. I haven't always been angry. And if I have been angry, what's the root of that anger? It's hurt. And then looking into, okay, what hurt me that I was that angry?
mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think the process is really starting to relearn new patterns and break up the patterns that have led you to that place.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that ending stage, maybe when you're divorced or you're separated again, your identity is just shattered. And so you have to relearn who you are. And that can be very uncomfortable. It's almost like growing pains, like you're growing into a new
Yeah.
person. And it can be painful
Mm-hmm,
because you are kind of doing it on your own. It's like you have to reparent yourself, basically. And
mm,
so I always tell people to be very gentle with yourself, especially in the age of social media. We see everybody, and no one is really putting their flaws on social media.
No,
Nobody's talking
no.
about their
Everybody
abuse.
can be any and
Yeah.
everything they want to be on social media. I
Yeah,
say it
you
all the
can
time.
make up an entire
New
life.
life.
No one is, yeah, new life, a new life. Yeah, no one
Mhm,
is talking about their abuse, their arguments, the cheating,
mhm.
the pain. You know, I woke up feeling depressed today. Like social media, it is a lie. Um, and so really having to sit with yourself and say, okay, who am I? And not comparing your journey to anyone else's. A
Mhm.
lot of times people will say, you don't even look like half of what you've been through.
Yeah.
Yes, because I'm mature to not have blasted everything on social media, right? Like you get those people who have to tell every bit of their life. So then sometimes you do know more than you should about
Like
people.
I just saw that the other day. I was having a conversation with somebody about. I'm like, what would make a person
No filter.
that on social media? And for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
people that will go along with you, they mean you no good,
No good. No
right?
good.
Like
Yep.
somebody that really cares about you genuinely would say, don't do that.
Yep. It's very similar
I'm
to
gonna
the
call you
people
out.
who, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very similar to the people who film fights, right? They are
Oh, good
actually
one. Yeah,
endorsing it too. It's like you play
yeah,
a part in this hurt and this pain too because you didn't stop it. You're sitting here filming it.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think a lot of times people who do that want to be validated in their pain.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a part that they are in denial about and not recognizing their own flaws. That's another red flag you have to be very aware of is when people always point the finger and have something to say about the other person.
My
It's
friend
like,
calls it victimism.
oh yeah,
Victimism.
yeah,
Always a
yeah,
victim. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. That's a huge red flag. If you're dating somebody and they're always bashing their ex, or if they're still bitter, and if you just take a moment and you say, okay, I hear you kind of talking bad about them, but what did you do to them? Like,
Yeah.
what really happened with
What's
them?
your role in it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And sometimes they may not even be aware to know that they played a role in it. But again, when you are operating from such a low place of healing, all you want is to be validated, and you just want people on your side. You want to have the people sitting around helping validate your offense. And I talk about that also in my book. Again, you have to have wise counsel when you're healing, and not just the people who will sit around
The yes people.
and validate that. Yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like I could say, yeah, I slapped my husband yesterday, and if I have one person over here saying you did the right thing, and then
Yeah,
I have
just
one person
one.
over here saying that's wrong. Like that's you. That's a form of domestic violence, even for a man. If I have that person versus the other person, it can shift the whole trajectory of a relationship. And so you have to be very mindful of the people who you're listening to.
That is such a good point because I've often said people like this, they only need one person to agree with them.
One person.
They don't
Yep.
need they don't need a group of folks. They
Yep.
just need one, seriously, they just need one person. Uh,
Yeah.
and because unfortunately we live in a world that's geared towards what you just described, filming the fight, you know,
Hmm.
unfortunately, that's the world in which we live. And not too many times will you get a situation where people will tell folks the right thing the right
Yep.
way. And sometimes it's just because it's not even because they want to see them fall. Sometimes people just feel like, well, I don't want to get in somebody's business. Or I don't,
Right.
it's so many reasons why people don't call folks out. But my thing is, I surround myself with real friends, those people
Yep.
that will tell me the truth. And I have one dear friend that we often say this. I didn't even call you because I didn't want to hear it this time because we were determined we were going to do it our way, right? And we knew the other one
Yeah.
would put us
Yeah.
in our place, right? So
Yep.
it's like I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to hear the truth this time. I want to
And
do
it
it.
might, yeah, yeah, it might sting for a minute hearing the truth, but then you'll look back and you'll be very grateful for it.
Absolutely.
But the fact that you have friends like that is amazing. That's something that I'm really starting to embrace too. Because again,
Yeah.
when I was silenced by my shame, I didn't really tell a lot of my friends what they were going through. Some of my friends really didn't even know how bad it was till they read my book.
Wow.
Um, and so I think having friends like that at this age and at this stage of my life is so important because I have been so vulnerable, but they'll
Mm-hmm.
keep it real with me too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important. So that's another big thing too. To really, I don't think it matters how old or young you are, but to look at your circle, because there's a
Mm.
quote, and I don't know who says it, but it says that you are the reflection of your closest five friends.
5 friends. Yeah.
Yep.
5 people
And
in your
I,
circle. You are the
yeah,
sum.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yep. And so I look at my five closest friends, and it's like, well, if this one is a little off the edge, like I might have to reel it back in because I'm not trying to be a sum of that. Like I'm not trying to, let
Yeah.
my life reflect that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, it's human nature not to want to be wrong, you know,
Mm.
but it's also maturity to understand that you can't always be right. And, and when you aren't, being accountable is a sign of responsibility, it's a sign of maturity, and it's a sign of growth.
Mhm. Mhm.
One of the things that I hear a lot is about having how difficult it is to have children and co-parent in these particular situations. Let's talk about that when we come back
Yeah.
from break. We'll be right back on Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM in a moment. And we are still here on 94.7 FM. I am here with Victoria Marshall, and she's given us a little insight into her book, Broken on Purpose. Go ahead and tell us, and you can tell us again before we end the show, where can you get this book?
Yeah, this book is available on Amazon. It's ebook and it is a paperback copy. It's also on Walmart's platform, Barnes and Noble. If you just Google, it'll come up. You can
Broken on
find it.
Purpose. So is it audible? When I hear ebook, that's not audible.
I do have an audio version as well.
Yay!
Yep, I have an audio
I'm that
version.
person. I
Ebook,
gotta have
yeah.
audio.
Ebook is like if you're tablets or phones.
Hmm.
So some people like to just carry their phones and tablets around. I'm old school. I like to have like a paper copy in hand.
Yeah, and a
Yeah.
bookmark and all that. I don't need
Yep.
any of that. Just talk to me. Okay, so the co-parenting thing with a narcissist is such a big deal. I've heard so many horror stories about, especially if it was a divorce involved,
Yeah.
and the couple gets to have like joint
Mhm.
custody.
Mhm.
Yeah, like tell us about your experience and maybe some lessons learned in this co-parenting experience.
Yeah, I would say I had a very nasty divorce, and most of it was around my daughter. Um,
Hmm.
the house, the material items, like we got through that so fast, but the largest piece was my daughter because it was almost like a possession for him. And it didn't matter, her emotions didn't matter, the separation from her mom didn't matter, the bonding with me didn't matter. It was like a possession. But because he knew how much I loved my daughter, that was the only pawn that he could use to affect me because I had already left home. I said, you can have everything. I left home. I moved in with my dad. I borrowed a friend's car. I was like, I just wanted to cut ties as much as I could because at that point I had started to recognize how they like to kind of keep you on a string with things.
So I have to interject here because,
Hmm.
um, if we were talking about diabetes, which is a diagnosable illness, if we were
Yeah.
talking about diabetes, I'm a diabetic, all of us, we'd be talking about some of the same symptoms, right?
Hmm.
You may not experience all of them, but it'd be most of what I experience because that's what
Hmm.
happens with diabetes, right?
Right, right, right.
It's a recurring theme, and this is a diagnosable illness, right? Do they consider it a mental illness? No. Somebody told me it's a personality disorder.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So one of the themes has been the child being a possession.
Hmm.
Another theme is they don't really care about the child, but it's that pawn. It's that one thing that they can use for
Yep.
sure to manipulate,
Hmm.
hold over your head. This is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because if you think about it, in my case, I had left nothing else for him to manipulate me with.
Oh, but another
Yeah.
thing is that's a theme, and this may blow your mind. Letting all the material things go.
Oh yeah.
They didn't want to. They just
Yeah.
wanted.
Yeah.
They just wanted to get out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody was like,
Um,
"No, you can't do that. You got to get this." No, I just want to go.
no, I think by that time you are so emotionally and mentally beat down that you don't even have the strength to fight for stuff that doesn't matter. And I think that might even be a tactic of people who are that toxic, to
Mm-hmm.
beat you down so badly that you don't even have the strength to fight. And that's really how I was, honestly. I had definitely reached a breaking point, to the point where I even thought that I needed to like go inpatient, because
Mm-hmm.
here I am, this
Mm-hmm.
new mom with postpartum depression, undiagnosed at the time. I stopped working for the first time ever in my life. All my income was tied to him, not
Mm-hmm.
knowing that another form of domestic violence or abuse is financial abuse. So
Absolutely.
I
Mm-hmm.
learned that while I was unemployed and married, and I started to recognize that I shouldn't really have to ask for money like this, or it shouldn't be this hard for you to give me money. And so recognizing that he liked having that control over me too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so by that time, I was just so beat down. It was like, you can have it all. You can. I just want my daughter. And I think maybe I probably shouldn't have been so open about how I just wanted my daughter, because
Yeah.
then got it. Like she, I
This
got
is
something
what.
to
This is
do.
the hook. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep. So we were in court for 3 years. And I would say for 2 years, it was all about my daughter. Between him fighting for full custody, to us having to prove why I was fit because I had postpartum depression, to really having to put myself on a stand and talk about my character. And it was like, it was so twisted, because in court you can't really use these terms, narcissist. You can't
No.
use these
No.
terms, oh, they're toxic. They want to see everything proved and on paper.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have something from a doctor that proves a mental illness, that proves their character, it's very hard for you to win anything against them, because you almost look like you're just bad mouthing them. And it almost does you a disservice to
Mm-hmm.
get up there and talk about them like
Wow.
that. So what I had learned to do was I created, and I would suggest this for maybe anyone currently going through this, a calendar of every month. And so when the court would give him time with my daughter, if he would give me that time because maybe he wanted to go party, or it got to a point where he was tired of having my daughter, I would document every time he gave my daughter to me, because it showed that he really didn't want her. He just wanted at the time to say that to the
To
court.
make your life miserable.
Yeah, yeah. So every
Mm-hmm.
time he showed up, maybe smelling like alcohol, I documented it. Every time he smelled like marijuana, I documented it. Every time maybe my daughter came back not looking her best, I documented it. So I had something to hand the court to say, you gave him a week's worth of time, and this is how much he actually took.
Mm.
That actually did definitely help me towards the end of my case, and it definitely made him mad to even know that I strategically was even doing something to stand up for myself. They can't stand when
We
you
were
stand
talking
up for
offline, and you offline, and you said you have to manipulate the.
manipulator. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to manipulate the manipulator, and that does not mean to go to the level of their toxicity. It doesn't, you don't have to be toxic at all, but it's really recognizing, how can I get over on them? And one thing that people like, that they strive or they thrive off of people needing them. And so if I would say something like, hey, I really need to spend time with my daughter today, or what do you think about her coming with me, putting the power in his hand, then I would get my daughter, right? Because he felt like he was doing me a favor. And he didn't really see that I was doing my own strategy of trying to keep my daughter, home with me. So making him feel like he was like having the ultimate decision over something, but really recognizing that at the end of the day, if it's helping me get my daughter, then I'll play that game with him, right? Um, and so making him feel like he's in control is one of the
Mhm.
things I kind of have to do. And so it just depends on your situation. So if there's something your kids may need, don't ever go in bashing and saying, you didn't do this, this, and this. You owe me this, this, and this. Is making them feel validated almost about who they are. It can make you kind of feel like, ah, sometimes, like, I do not want to say this. Like,
Yeah.
you can
Uh-huh.
almost cringe at it. But if you can get over that and recognize that I'm talking to somebody who really doesn't have the emotional availability or capacity
Capacity. Yeah.
to even give into anything that I would spew out emotionally. So even
Mhm.
though I might sound like I'm nice, they don't even see it like that. They see it as in they're in control, as in this person needs me. So let me use that to my advantage.
How old was your daughter at the time?
My daughter was 6 months when I left for good. So
Okay. So she didn't understand what was going on.
no,
So,
no, and
so
I
how old is she now, and how are things now in terms of the co-parenting?
she's 4 years old now. So all her life, all she has known is her mom has a house and her dad has a house. And at first, that was very difficult for me. But even my therapist was like, "You have to look at it like this is all she will ever know." And so, because this is all she knows, she will adapt to it easier.
That will
Then,
be her norm.
yeah, that is her norm. Yep. And so she has adapted. Kids are very resilient. I know we say it all the time, but they are.
Yeah, they
They
really are.
conform. Yeah, they will conform and adapt to what they need to survive. Um, and so now, back to what you had just said, how old was she? I remember asking God, like, why would you give me my daughter if you knew this was going to happen? Like, it would have been so much easier for me to just pack my stuff and leave. I would have probably been out of court within 6 months. I was in court for 3 years. And I remember just
Mm.
hearing God say, because I create some of the most beautiful things in the midst of chaos. And I was like, okay. And so, really, just recognizing that while chaos is happening, we have to take the time to look at the beautiful things. Because if we just keep focusing on the chaos, we're going to feel chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can focus and be grateful for what we do have in the moment, it can shift our whole perspective on things.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
like
that's
that.
really what helped me continue to bond with my daughter during all of that. Because it was hard to show up for myself, but recognizing that this was a beautiful child, that was a gift, and that I had to show up for her really
Mhm.
helped me get through those 3 4 years. And now, I mean, she loves her dad because I always say kids will learn who their parents are. She will
Mhm.
have a time where she sees something, where she hears something, where she feels something, and it'll rub her a certain way. And I just have focused on creating an environment where she can talk to me.
Mhm.
I put my daughter in play therapy, which a lot of people think kids are just playing, but it's really helped her start to say things to me that she hadn't been saying before she started. Now one of her things is, "Can I talk to you about something?"
Yeah.
And we just call it a play doctor. And we don't even necessarily talk about her feelings a lot, but
Mhm.
getting her in a space where she knows this doctor is here to play with you. But if there are feelings you want to talk about, you can talk about them. And so she never talks really about them to the doctor, but then maybe like when we're driving in the car one day, she might say that cue where she's like, "Can I talk to you about something?" And she starts to share her feelings.
Mhm.
And so, really, just teaching her at a young age to share her feelings, and you can have good or bad feelings about your parents.
Mhm.
And so, if mommy or daddy does something to you that doesn't make you feel good, talk about it. Um, and just really, again, understanding that she has her own relationship with him. And I think a lot of times when we go through breakups, divorce, separation, we can even use our kids against the other person if we're not narcissists,
Yeah.
just because we're hurt.
Yeah.
And so having to be mature to know that she has her own relationship with him, and it would be very selfish of me to ever try to manipulate that or to make her have her own perspective of him because I may not be so fond of him. Like that would be very selfish.
Yeah.
Um, I just trust that as she grows and gets older, she will learn and recognize who he is and have her own perspective of him without me having to say anything.
Influence it. Yeah. So
Hmm.
at what point did you get the revelation that you needed to use everything in your life and your experiences and your brokenness to help others?
I would say about a year ago, at the end at the end of my divorce,
Mm-hmm.
almost yeah, I was divorced in October of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and by the end of it, I just was like, I am through all of this. I am through the courts. I am through the custody battle. And I have to use this to help someone. Because again, like I said, a lot of my friends were even like, nobody knew. You don't look like what you've been through. And I
Mm-hmm.
just knew that I wasn't alone.
Mm-hmm.
I would join like groups on Facebook where it would be like parents for child custody. And I'm like, oh my God, all of us have so many of the similar experiences. And I
Yeah,
have
it's
to use this.
crazy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have, yep. And so just knowing that I have to use this to show people like you are not alone, even if it's just getting somebody out of that isolated stage into
Mhm.
whatever community that may look like, um, is worth it.
What advice do you have for for someone that's going through their broken season?
Yeah. My advice would be gentle with yourself first.
Mhm.
Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be so hard on yourself when you start to have those moments where you realize that you were probably manipulated or that you feel like you've lost time. Wake up every day and tell yourself that nothing is wasted and nothing is lost. Um,
Mm.
I think we get so stuck on our own timeline that we forget that when things happen just as they happen at the exact time they're supposed to happen. And so, really embracing that and then following the steps of sitting with your pain, writing down the patterns
Mhm.
of your life that continue to lead you to broken places. Admit your flaws, admit you're wrong in it. Seek that wise counsel, find community, do not isolate, and forgive. I
Mm.
think you have to learn to forgive people who hurt you. And forgiveness does not always require reconciliation.
No.
You don't have to reconcile with someone, and forgiveness does not mean that you're saying what they did to you was okay.
Mhm.
It's saying that this happened and I'm moving forward and I
Mhm.
forgive them. Um,
And it's more for you than it is for them.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They
Mhm.
don't even have to know that you're doing
Absolutely.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Speaking to my present co-parenting relationship, I just know that the way I've forgiven has brought me a lot of inner peace. Just last week, I took my daughter to Disney World, and her dad showed up to surprise her, and it was a huge deal for my family and myself. And I was just so shocked at the inner peace that I had of being around this person who had offended me, violated me, abused me, like hurt me. And I just was like, whatever. Like, sure, if you want to come, it's for your daughter. But when I really took a moment to reflect, I knew deep within that I would have not had such peace or even allowed that had I not forgiven him.
Mhm.
Because when we stay stuck in our offense, we stay in that place, and then
Yeah.
I would be penalizing my daughter because of my unforgiveness, and that's not fair to her.
Oh, wow.
And so I think forgiveness, like you just said, is for us more than it is for the other person. I think
Um,
it'll almost leave the other person baffled, like, how is she just so okay? How is he
Absolutely.
just okay? Yeah. It almost
Absolutely.
leaves them
Because
like
you know you're the
stuck, like,
perpetrator, but yet somebody's forgiven you?
right, right. They'll be almost looking at you like, are you about to do something to me? Like, is this a setup? You're like,
Yeah.
no, I've just forgiven you. I'm
I'm
good.
at peace. Man, that
Yeah,
inner peace is something else. Um,
yeah.
Tell us more about the book. What's your favorite chapter in the book?
My favorite chapter in the book, I have two favorite chapters, and
Okay.
one of them is the longest. It's the book about inner child wounds. So, looking at our wounds that have occurred from childhood. And I provide readers with this logic model that breaks down things that have occurred at the beginning stages of our life and how they have impacted us in our
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And when you can kind of intercept that pattern, then you can break these bad relationships. And a lot of this stuff is because of our childhood. Even narcissists or people who are abusers, more than likely, they were abused themselves. They were neglected as children. They grew up in a
Mm-hmm.
very toxic home, but because
Mm-hmm.
they haven't healed or gone through therapy, or they're not even aware of their inner child wounds, they continue to abuse others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's one of my favorite chapters because I just know that if we can get back to that childlike state of just being happy and creative and laughing all the time. Kids laugh at the littlest silliest things.
Mm-hmm.
Pain sometimes can make us so serious that we
Mm-hmm.
forget to laugh. Like I remember like the first time I like just enjoyed watching TV again. And I was just like, wow, like I have been neglecting myself so much, or how good it felt just to like laugh again looking at silly stuff, which
Mm-hmm.
is like a childlike manner, right?
Yeah.
So really learning to um, have a mind as a child again is really important in your healing. And then the last chapter in the book where I talk about settling for the best and not better, but in all areas of our life. I think we don't just choose bad relationships. Sometimes we might settle for a job that's not good just because
Yes.
we
Yeah.
think we're not deserving of better. Somebody who's been through a toxic relationship will just settle for someone just because they don't seem as bad, and then kind of repeat the cycle again, not really waiting out until they find that best person, to
Mm-hmm.
accept them.
Mm-hmm.
So we settle a lot and we can become very kind of passive in life if we just think that we just have to go for like the next better thing, but really trust that there is the best thing out there for you and you're deserving of it.
Yeah. I want to find my purpose. How do I start that journey?
Yeah, I will say that I did not know what my purpose was even a year ago, right
Mm-hmm.
at the end of my divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just felt like I was still kind of coming down from all of the trauma. There's a thing that says that when you've been through high stress environments or through a lot of traumatic situations, like there's like a state of rest that your body will enter into. And sometimes you feel like you're being lazy, but it's
Mm-hmm.
really your body trying to catch up from that
Come
fight or
down off
flight.
that
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So to anybody who's listening who might be experiencing that, you are not being lazy. Your body is just recouping, and it's like learning to rest again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so really, when I came back to that moment, I was able to sit and say, okay, I went through all of this. So what is it going to be used for? And
Mm-hmm.
finding my audience, right? I know that my audience is broken people.
Mm-hmm.
And really using my voice. And so now I know that my purpose is to help people who have been through the worst of the worst domestic issues, who are in court losing their kids, who don't
Yeah.
have identity because they have been codependent all their lives, people who are adopted, people who struggle with rejection and abandonment. It's like a lot of times the thing that you struggle with in life, your pain is connected to your purpose. So recognizing that me struggling with so much rejection throughout my life and betrayal and abandonment, that's because it was connected to my purpose. And
Yeah.
so now that I'm able to come out on top, I can help others kind of heal, live, and thrive through all of that.
Mm-hmm. I've enjoyed this discussion so much, and I do hope you will promise to come back.
Yes.
Let's talk some more. We are at the end of the show. It's been a great show. Looking forward to having you back, and definitely looking forward to having you guys back next Saturday, same chat channel, same chat time, right here on Doctor2Doctor in the chat room on 94.7 FM. We will see you then.